Good afternoon. It's a privilege to speak to you at this Philadelphia Town Hall meeting. You are all here today because you care about the safety of your community. But your community is more at risk than it ever has been before because of a gaping loophole in current gun legislation laws that is allowing convicted criminals to purchase firearms easily. The loophole is simple to explain. If you purchase a firearm at a federally licensed vendor, 100% of those transactions require background checks to ensure that the intended purchaser is not a criminal. In contrast, can you guess how many gun transactions require background checks for online sales and at gun shows? The answer, alarmingly, is zero. None. No background checks whatsoever are required at gun shows or for online sales, where 50% of gun transactions take place in this country. What that means is that 1 out of every 2 gun transactions in this country today go on without any background check. So let me ask you a question. If you were a convicted criminal and you were looking to purchase a gun for your next crime, where would you purchase that gun? The answer is clear. You would go to a gun show or you would purchase that gun online where no background check would be conducted. Now this is no small loophole. This is the Grand Canyon of loopholes, in fact, and the consequences are dire. People are dying needlessly because of this ineffective gun policy. One tragic example of this consequence is the recent Batman movie theater shooting in Aurora, Colorado, in which gunman James Holmes purchased thousands of rounds of ammunition online and therefore evaded any background checks. Background checks that would have uncovered the gunman's troubled psychiatric past. We must close this loophole to make sure that tragedies like that don't take place in the future. Now, undoubtedly, all of us likely have unique views on gun policy. Some of you may even be members of the National Rifle Association and are against more stringent gun policies. But I think we can all agree on my proposal, because my proposal to close this loophole will not make it any more difficult for someone without a criminal background to purchase firearms. Instead, it's a safeguard to prevent criminals from purchasing firearms, something that we can all agree is a worthwhile cause. In the next few minutes, I'm going to explain the violence epidemic that has taken place in this country because of this loophole, and then explain the simple steps that can be taken to close the loophole to make our streets safer. Now, like you, I am a true Pennsylvanian. My grandfather was born and raised, lived all of his life in Pennsylvania, and he taught me at a very young age how to shoot firearms. He taught me to use them safely and effectively. And since then, I have studied closely gun legislation, and because of that, I am confident that my proposal to close this loophole is an important improvement to gun legislation and will help make us safer. Now, regardless of your political views or your stance on guns, the firearm murder rate in this country is alarming to all of us. According to government data, the U.S. per capita firearm murder rate is 30 times that of Britain, which has the strictest background check policy in the world. 30 times more firearm murders in this country. What may be perhaps even more alarming is that among the world's wealthiest countries, 87% of all children killed by firearms are American children. If you think this is a broad problem in the United States but doesn't impact us right here in Philadelphia, then you're sadly mistaken. Just weeks ago, Michelle Brainerd, a 5-year-old girl from South Philadelphia, was playing outside with toys and was killed after being shot in the head by a stray bullet. The gun that fired that bullet was purchased at a gun show by a gang member with a criminal background. No background check was conducted. The purchase of that gun was 100% legal. This is another example of a preventable atrocity, and we need to close this background check loophole to make sure it does not happen again. Now, to be clear, background checks do not conflict with the Second Amendment of the United States, which protects our right as American citizens to bear firearms to protect ourselves and our family. As citizens of Philadelphia, the birthplace of America, I'm sure you are all familiar with our founding fathers' views of guns. Samuel Adams, one of our founding fathers, when speaking of the Second Amendment, once stated, and I quote, "The U.S. Constitution shall never be construed as to prevent U.S. citizens who are peaceable citizens from keeping firearms," unquote. Note here that Mr. Adams used the term peaceable citizens. Now, if you have purchased a firearm in the last 20 years in this country at a federally licensed vendor, you are familiar with the very quick and painless background check that's conducted to ensure that you are, in fact, a peaceable citizen. This is simple and effective gun policy. Since 1994, background checks have prevented 1.3 million convicted criminals and other prohibited purchasers that were trying to purchase firearms. Now, if this is such effective gun policy, and background checks are so easy to implement, then why is there this loophole that allows convicted criminals to easily purchase guns at gun shows or online? Now, unfortunately, I can't answer that question for you because it just doesn't make sense. But what I can tell you is that the consequences of this loophole are tragic. According to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, guns purchased at gun shows without background checks are a significant source of crime in this country. According to a Department of Justice survey, 35% of armed crimes in this country involve guns that are purchased without background checks at places like gun shows. According to a New York City investigation, 62% of vendors at gun shows agreed to sell firearms to a person that admitted they could not pass a background test if required. This is negligent, this is wrong, and we need to fix this problem. We can easily enhance the safety of our community while still upholding the sanctity of the Second Amendment by closing this loophole and requiring background checks be made for all firearm transactions, especially at gun shows. Now, looking around the room here, I can see that some of you may not agree with me fully yet. We may still have some skeptics here, and that's okay. Let's talk about some of the biggest misconceptions of my proposal. One of the biggest misconceptions is that requiring background checks for all gun transactions at gun shows is complex and would be very costly. Well, that could not be farther from the truth. My proposal is very simple to implement and would involve no cost whatsoever to gun vendors. Background checks are already conducted by all federally licensed gun vendors, so the database and infrastructure is already in existence. Any gun vendor, online or at a gun show, could conduct a background check simply by using a computer and an internet connection. The second biggest misconception is that my proposal represents a barrier to purchasing weapons and would make it more difficult to people that use weapons. Well, this also is inaccurate. A typical background check takes less than 2 minutes to conduct, and the background check could even be conducted as you're browsing the store, seeing which weapon you hope to purchase. To be clear, my proposal involves no new legislation. Instead, it simply takes existing effective legislation used at federally licensed vendors and applies them to gun shows and online gun transactions. Background checks are easy, they're cheap, and they're effective. So why wouldn't we have background checks be part of every gun transaction, including gun shows and online transactions? Former NRA President Charlton Heston once famously stated that guns don't kill people, people kill people. Well, if this is true and you believe that, then you must also believe that it is our responsibility to make sure guns are in the hands of peaceable citizens and not in the hands of people that kill people, convicted criminals, and people with murderous intentions. It is our responsibility to make sure we use background checks so that gun transactions only take place with peaceable citizens. We must make sure that we never forget victims like Michelle Brainerd, and instead we must remember them as a symbol of the responsibility that we bear to enact responsible gun legislation. Please contact your local Congress representative today and ask that we close the loophole on background checks to make safer gun policy. Thank you. With that, I'll take questions. Yes, Margaret.
How much do you think this lies, the responsibility for this also lies with the gun manufacturers? Why aren't they out in front of this issue, and why aren't they pushing for this kind of legislation?
Well, I appreciate your question, but I don't think at this point it does us any good to lay blame. We know what the problem is. The problem is that criminals can purchase guns without background checks, and we know the ramifications that that has in our society, the escalating violence, and we know what we need to do to fix it. So it doesn't necessarily matter whose responsibility it is, but we know the course that we need to take, and that's to close the loophole. Yeah, Aaron.
How do you plan to deal with opposition from gun lobby, online retailers, or people who sell guns at gun shows?
Well, one of the things that I try to emphasize is that this is not a barrier to purchasing guns. Background checks at gun shows take less than 2 minutes. Online, it's even faster. So this doesn't represent an obstacle for those enterprises. Yes.
If it's so easy to conduct these background checks, why don't we just punish the people, the vendors who don't do them?
Well, creating a law that requires background checks for all firearm transactions at gun shows, really that there would be punishments as a ramification for vendors that don't conduct background checks for firearm sales. So it is a form of that.
Do you think this will increase the black market for guns, and how do you see that factoring into, bettering the safety of, all the statistics you showed? I'm not fully convinced that because background checks, yes, it'll screen, it'll prevent from more purchases, but I feel like those same criminals will find another way to buy it.
Certainly, criminals buying guns is a serious problem. By requiring background checks at gun shows for online sales, the full intention is that stops criminals from purchasing guns in those settings. If those individuals, if those criminals seek guns on the black market, then that's a problem that we'll have to address, and that's what law enforcement is involved in preventing every day. But the black market is illegal. Gun shows, online transaction, that is legal, and we need to stop those legal transactions to provide criminals with guns.
Great. 87% of all children killed with guns are in the U.S.
Yes. Our per capita murder rate for guns is just
worldly insane.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
30 times more murders are in the States. Is that like standardized or normalized?
Yeah.
What?
Oh, okay.
Per capita.
Oh, per capita. Okay.
What was off?
The camera's off. The camera on.
The camera's on.